Jake Martinez pulled his horse to a stop at the edge of the riverside wagon yard. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky orange and pink. His horse was tired after riding all day. Jake was tired too. He had been moving cattle from one ranch to another for 12 years now. At 34 years old, he was used to being alone. He liked the quiet life of a cowboy. The wagon yard was a place where travelers stopped to rest. There were old wooden wagons scattered around the dirt lot. Some were broken, some were just old. People used this place to sleep when they had nowhere else to go. It was not fancy, but it was free and safe. Jake got down from his horse. He stretched his back and legs. Tomorrow he would ride to the Hendricks Ranch. Tonight he would sleep under the stars like he had done thousands of times before. He led his horse toward the water trough so she could drink. That was when he saw her. A woman was sleeping against one of the broken wagon wheels. She was curled up in a ball, trying to stay warm. The night air was getting cold. October in Montana could be bitter, especially when the sun went down. Jake could see his breath in the air already. The woman looked young, maybe 25 years old. Her clothes were too thin for this weather. She wore a light jacket that would not keep anyone warm on a night like this. Next to her sat an old, brown suitcase. The leather was worn and scratched. It looked like it had traveled many miles. Jake stopped walking. He watched the woman for a moment. She was shivering in her sleep. Her face was peaceful, but he could tell she was cold. Her hands were tucked under her arms, trying to find warmth. Jake had seen many people in wagon yards over the years. Most were just passing through like him. Some were running from something. Some were running to something. This woman looked different. There was something about the way she slept that told Jake she was not just wandering. She had a purpose. She was going somewhere important, but right now she was cold and alone. Jake's horse finished drinking water. He tied her to a post and gave her some hay to eat. Then he walked back to his bedroll and supplies. He always carried 2 blankets. One was thin and light for summer nights. The other was thick wool for cold weather like this. He picked up the thick blanket. It was heavy and warm. His grandmother had made it for him many years ago before she died. It was one of the few things he owned that meant something to him. The blanket was brown and red with a pattern of horses running across it. It had kept him warm through many cold nights. Jake looked at the sleeping woman again. She had moved slightly and was now facing away from him. He could see she was still shivering. Her breath came out in small white clouds. He made a decision. Jake walked quietly across the dirt yard. His boots made soft sounds on the ground, but the woman did not wake up. When he reached her, he carefully spread his blanket over her sleeping form. The thick wool covered her from her shoulders to her feet. The woman stirred slightly when the blanket touched her. She pulled it closer around herself without waking up. Jake could see her face relax as the warmth surrounded her. She stopped, shivering. Jake stood there for a moment, watching her sleep peacefully under his blanket. He felt something strange in his chest. It was not love or attraction. It was something simpler than that. It was the feeling of doing something right, something good. He had never been married. He had never had a serious girlfriend. Jake's life was simple and solitary. He worked with cattle and horses. He slept under the open sky. He earned his money and spent very little of it. People often asked him if he was lonely, but Jake always said no. He liked his life the way it was, but standing there in the wagon yard watching a stranger sleep under his blanket, Jake felt something he had not felt in a long time. He felt connected to another person, not romantically, but humanly. One person helping another person. It felt good. Jake walked back to his horse and supplies. He still had his thin summer blanket. It would have to do for tonight. He had slept in worse conditions. He made a small fire and heated some coffee in a metal pot. The coffee was strong and black the way he liked it. As he sat by his fire, Jake thought about the woman. Who was she? Where was she going? Why was she sleeping in a wagon yard instead of a hotel? She had a suitcase, so she was definitely traveling somewhere. But she was alone, and she looked like she did not have much money. Jake had been alone for most of his adult life, but it was his choice. He got the feeling that this woman's situation was different. She looked like someone who had been forced to be alone, someone who was starting over. The fire crackled and sent sparks up into the dark sky. Jake poured himself another cup of coffee and settled in for the night. Tomorrow he would ride to the Hendricks ranch. The woman would probably be gone by then, and he would never see her again. That was how life worked when you were always moving from place to place. But Jake found himself hoping that wherever she was going, she would be warm and safe. The blanket would help her tonight. Tomorrow she would have to find her own way to stay warm. Jake lay down on his thin blanket and pulled his coat over himself. Above him, the stars were bright and clear. He had looked at these same stars for 12 years. They never changed. They were constant and reliable, like his life. But tonight, something felt different. Tonight, Jake had done something that connected him to another person's story. He did not know what that story was, but for a few hours he was part of it. That thought followed him into sleep, where he dreamed of brown suitcases and wool blankets and a woman's peaceful face in the firelight. Sarah Chen woke up as the first light of dawn touched the mountains. For a moment, she did not remember where she was. Then she felt the thick wool blanket covering her body. It was warm and heavy and smelled like horses and campfire smoke. She sat up quickly, looking around the wagon yard. The blanket fell to her waist. Where had it come from? Last night she had been so tired and cold that she just found a place to lie down and tried to sleep. She did not remember having a blanket. Sarah looked around and saw a man by a small fire about 30 feet away. He was tall and wore a cowboy hat. His back was turned to her as he packed his things into a bedroll. Next to him stood a brown horse with a white spot on her face. The man must have given her the blanket. Sarah felt embarrassed. She was not used to taking help from strangers, but she was also grateful. The night had been very cold. Without the blanket, she might have gotten sick. Sarah stood up and folded the blanket carefully. She picked up her suitcase and walked toward the man. Her legs were stiff from sleeping on the hard ground. "Excuse me," she said. The man turned around. He had kind eyes and a weathered face. He looked like he spent most of his time outdoors. There were lines around his eyes from squinting in the sun. "Morning," he said. His voice was quiet and gentle. "Did you give me this blanket?" Sarah asked, holding it out to him. The man nodded. "You looked cold," he said simply. Sarah felt her cheeks get warm. "Thank you. That was very kind of you." She held the blanket toward him. "Here, take it back." The man shook his head. "Keep it for now. I can see you are traveling. You might need it again." "But it is yours," Sarah said. "I cannot take your blanket." "I have another one," the man said. It was not exactly true, but he did not want her to feel bad. "Where are you headed?" "Billings," Sarah said. "I'm going to teach at an elementary school there." The man nodded. "That is a good job. Kids need good teachers." Sarah looked at this cowboy who had covered her with his blanket while she slept. Most people would have just walked past her. Some might have even told her to move along, but this man had seen that she was cold and had helped her without asking for anything in return. "What is your name?" she asked. "Jake Martinez," he said. I am Sarah Chen," she said. "Thank you again for the blanket, Jake. How can I return it to you?" Jake walked to his horse and pulled a small piece of paper from his saddlebag. He wrote something on it with a pencil stub. "You can mail it to me here when you get settled," he said, handing her the paper. Sarah looked at the paper. It said, "Jake Martinez, Hendricks Ranch, Miles City, Montana," in careful handwriting. "I will send it back as soon as I can," Sarah promised. Jake nodded and tied his bedroll to his horse. "How are you getting to Billings?" he asked. "The bus," Sarah said. "It comes through here around 8 in the morning." Jake looked at his watch. It was 6:30. "You have some time to wait. There is a diner about a mile down the road. They serve breakfast." Sarah touched her jacket pocket where she kept her money. She had $43. That had to last until she got her first paycheck from the school. She could not afford to eat at a diner. "I am not really hungry," she said. Jake could see that she was trying to save money. He had been in that situation before, when he was young and just starting out. He walked to his fire and picked up a metal thermos. "I made too much coffee," he said, holding it out to her. "Would you like some? It will help keep you warm while you wait for the bus." Sarah hesitated. She did not want to take more from this stranger. But the coffee smelled good and she was cold. "Thank you," she said, taking the thermos. Jake mounted his horse. "Good luck with your teaching job," he said. "Good luck with your cattle," Sarah said. Jake smiled. It was the first real smile Sarah had seen from him. It changed his whole face and made him look younger. "Take care of yourself," he said. Then he turned his horse and rode away from the wagon yard. Sarah watched him go until he disappeared over a hill. Then she sat down on her suitcase and poured coffee from the thermos into the metal cap. The coffee was strong and hot. It warmed her from the inside. As she drank the coffee, Sarah thought about her life. 3 months ago, she had been married and living in Seattle. Her husband, David, worked at a bank. They had a nice apartment and a good life, or so she thought. Then, she found out that David was seeing another woman. When she confronted him, he said he was not happy and wanted a divorce. Just like that, her whole life fell apart. Sarah could have stayed in Seattle. She could have found another teaching job there, but she wanted to start completely over. She wanted to go somewhere new, where no one knew about her failed marriage. When she saw the job posting for a third-grade teacher in Billings, Montana, she applied right away. The school hired her over the phone. They needed a teacher quickly because their previous teacher had moved away suddenly. Sarah sold most of her things, packed what she could carry, and bought a bus ticket to Montana. She had been traveling for 2 days. Yesterday, the bus broke down 50 miles from Billings. The bus company said they would send another bus, but it would not arrive until this morning. Sarah had spent most of her money on the bus ticket. She could not afford a hotel room, so she walked to the wagon yard to sleep. Sarah had felt very alone and scared last night. She was starting a new life, in a place where she knew no one. She had very little money and nowhere to live except for a small room she had rented sight unseen. But this morning, a stranger had shown her kindness. Jake Martinez had given her his blanket and his coffee without asking for anything in return. He had not asked her personal questions or made her feel bad about sleeping in a wagon yard. He had just helped her. Sarah folded Jake's blanket and held it close to her chest. It still smelled like campfire smoke and horses. For some reason, that smell made her feel less alone. The bus arrived at 8 o'clock sharp. Sarah climbed aboard with her suitcase and Jake's blanket. As the bus pulled away from the wagon yard, she looked out the window at the place where she had spent the night. She would never forget this place or the cowboy who had helped her when she needed it most. Sarah did not know it yet, but that blanket would become the most important thing she owned. Not because it was valuable, but because it represented something she had almost stopped believing in. It represented the idea that there were still good people in the world, people who helped others just because it was the right thing to do. Sarah Chen woke up as the first light of dawn touched the mountains. For a moment, she did not remember where she was. Then she felt the thick wool blanket covering her body. It was warm and heavy and smelled like horses and campfire smoke. She sat up quickly, looking around the wagon yard. The blanket fell to her waist. Where had it come from? Last night she had been so tired and cold that she just found a place to lie down and tried to sleep. She did not remember having a blanket. Sarah looked around and saw a man by a small fire about 30 feet away. He was tall and wore a cowboy hat. His back was turned to her as he packed his things into a bedroll. Next to him stood a brown horse with a white spot on her face. The man must have given her the blanket. Sarah felt embarrassed. She was not used to taking help from strangers, but she was also grateful. The night had been very cold. Without the blanket, she might have gotten sick. Sarah stood up and folded the blanket carefully. She picked up her suitcase and walked toward the man. Her legs were stiff from sleeping on the hard ground. "Excuse me," she said. The man turned around. He had kind eyes and a weathered face. He looked like he spent most of his time outdoors. There were lines around his eyes from squinting in the sun. Morning, he said. His voice was quiet and gentle. Did you give me this blanket? Sarah asked, holding it out to him. The man nodded. You looked cold, he said simply. Sarah felt her cheeks get warm. Thank you. That was very kind of you. She held the blanket toward him. Here, take it back. The man shook his head. Keep it for now. I can see you are traveling. You might need it again. But it is yours, Sarah said. I cannot take your blanket. I have another one, the man said. It was not exactly true, but he did not want her to feel bad. Where are you headed? Billings, Sarah said. I'm going to teach at an elementary school there. The man nodded. That is a good job. Kids need good teachers. Sarah looked at this cowboy who had covered her with his blanket while she slept. Most people would have just walked past her. Some might have even told her to move along, but this man had seen that she was cold and had helped her without asking for anything in return. What is your name? She asked. Jake Martinez, he said. I am Sarah Chen, she said. Thank you again for the blanket, Jake. How can I return it to you? Jake walked to his horse and pulled a small piece of paper from his saddlebag. He wrote something on it with a pencil stub. You can mail it to me here when you get settled, he said, handing her the paper. Sarah looked at the paper. It said, Jake Martinez, Hendricks Ranch, Miles City, Montana, in careful handwriting. I will send it back as soon as I can, Sarah promised. Jake nodded and tied his bedroll to his horse. How are you getting to Billings? He asked. The bus, Sarah said. It comes through here around 8 in the morning. Jake looked at his watch. It was 6:30. You have some time to wait. There is a diner about a mile down the road. They serve breakfast. Sarah touched her jacket pocket where she kept her money. She had $43. That had to last until she got her first paycheck from the school. She could not afford to eat at a diner. I am not really hungry, she said. Jake could see that she was trying to save money. He had been in that situation before, when he was young and just starting out. He walked to his fire and picked up a metal thermos. I made too much coffee, he said, holding it out to her. Would you like some? It will help keep you warm while you wait for the bus. Sarah hesitated. She did not want to take more from this stranger. But the coffee smelled good and she was cold. Thank you, she said, taking the thermos. Jake mounted his horse. Good luck with your teaching job, he said. Good luck with your cattle, Sarah said. Jake smiled. It was the first real smile Sarah had seen from him. It changed his whole face and made him look younger. Take care of yourself, he said. Then he turned his horse and rode away from the wagon yard. Sarah watched him go until he disappeared over a hill. Then she sat down on her suitcase and poured coffee from the thermos into the metal cap. The coffee was strong and hot. It warmed her from the inside. As she drank the coffee, Sarah thought about her life. 3 months ago, she had been married and living in Seattle. Her husband, David, worked at a bank. They had a nice apartment and a good life, or so she thought. Then, she found out that David was seeing another woman. When she confronted him, he said he was not happy and wanted a divorce. Just like that, her whole life fell apart. Sarah could have stayed in Seattle. She could have found another teaching job there, but she wanted to start completely over. She wanted to go somewhere new, where no one knew about her failed marriage. When she saw the job posting for a 3rd-grade teacher in Billings, Montana, she applied right away. The school hired her over the phone. They needed a teacher quickly because their previous teacher had moved away suddenly. Sarah sold most of her things, packed what she could carry, and bought a bus ticket to Montana. She had been traveling for 2 days. Yesterday, the bus broke down 50 miles from Billings. The bus company said they would send another bus, but it would not arrive until this morning. Sarah had spent most of her money on the bus ticket. She could not afford a hotel room, so she walked to the wagon yard to sleep. Sarah had felt very alone and scared last night. She was starting a new life, in a place where she knew no one. She had very little money and nowhere to live except for a small room she had rented sight unseen. But this morning, a stranger had shown her kindness. Jake Martinez had given her his blanket and his coffee without asking for anything in return. He had not asked her personal questions or made her feel bad about sleeping in a wagon yard. He had just helped her. Sarah folded Jake's blanket and held it close to her chest. It still smelled like campfire smoke and horses. For some reason, that smell made her feel less alone. The bus arrived at 8 o'clock sharp. Sarah climbed aboard with her suitcase and Jake's blanket. As the bus pulled away from the wagon yard, she looked out the window at the place where she had spent the night. She would never forget this place or the cowboy who had helped her when she needed it most. Sarah did not know it yet, but that blanket would become the most important thing she owned. Not because it was valuable, but because it represented something she had almost stopped believing in. It represented the idea that there were still good people in the world, people who helped others just because it was the right thing to do. 6 months after their first meeting, Jake and Sarah had exchanged 12 letters. Their friendship had grown through words on paper, but they had not seen each other since that morning in the wagon yard. In her latest letter, Sarah sounded worried. "My car broke down yesterday," she wrote. "It is an old car and the mechanic says it needs a lot of work. I do not have money to fix it right now. I have been walking to school, but it is getting harder as the weather gets colder. I feel so helpless sometimes. In Seattle, I had people I could call when things went wrong. Here, I do not know who to ask for help." Jake read this letter 3 times. He could hear the loneliness and frustration in Sarah's words. He knew what it was like to have no one to call when things went wrong. He had been in that situation many times when he was younger. That night, Jake lay in his bunk thinking about Sarah's broken car. He had some money saved up. He was good with engines and could probably help her figure out what was wrong. The more he thought about it, the more he knew what he had to do. The next morning, Jake went to see Mr. Henderson, the ranch owner. Henderson was a fair man who treated his workers well. Jake had been working for him for 3 years and had never asked for time off except for one day when he was sick. "Mr. Henderson," Jake said, taking off his hat, "I need to ask you something." Henderson looked up from the papers on his desk. "What is it, Jake?" "I have a friend in Billings who is having some trouble with her car. I was wondering if I could take a few days off to go help her." Henderson studied Jake's face. In 3 years, Jake had never mentioned having friends anywhere. He was the most solitary person Henderson had ever known. "Is this friend someone special?" Henderson asked with a slight smile. Jake felt his cheeks get warm. "She is a good person who helped me once," he said. It was not exactly true, but Jake did not know how else to explain it. "Take the time you need," Henderson said, "but be back by Monday. We have cattle to move next week." "Thank you, sir," Jake said. Jake spent the rest of the day getting ready for the trip to Billings. He checked his truck to make sure it was running well. He packed a bag with clean clothes and his tools. He also stopped at the bank in town and took out some money from his savings account. That evening, Jake wrote a short letter to Sarah. "I am coming to Billings this weekend to help you with your car," he wrote. "I will be there Saturday morning. Do not worry about fixing it yourself." Jake mailed the letter on Friday morning, then loaded his truck and started the 3-hour drive to Billings. He had Sarah's address from her letters, but he had never been to her neighborhood before. Billings was bigger than any town Jake usually visited. The traffic and noise made him nervous. He was used to wide-open spaces and quiet roads. But he followed the directions he had written down and found Sarah's street. Sarah's apartment was in a small building with 6 units. It was old but well-maintained. Jake parked his truck and walked to her door. He felt nervous in a way he had not felt since he was a teenager. When Sarah opened the door, Jake was surprised by how different she looked from his memory. In the wagon yard, she had been sleeping and cold and wrapped in his blanket. Now she was awake and smiling, and her eyes were bright with surprise and happiness. "Jake," she said, "I cannot believe you are here. I just got your letter yesterday." "I wanted to help," Jake said simply. Sarah invited him inside her apartment. It was small and tidy, with books everywhere and student artwork on the walls. Jake felt too big for the space, like he might break something just by moving around. "Would you like some coffee?" Sarah asked. "I finally learned to make it as strong as yours." Jake nodded and sat carefully on her small couch. Sarah brought him coffee in a blue mug and sat across from him in a chair. "I cannot believe you drove all this way just to help me with my car," she said. "It is not that far," Jake said, though it was the longest trip he had taken in years. Sarah showed Jake where her car was parked behind the building. It was an old Honda with rust spots and a dented bumper. Jake lifted the hood and looked at the engine. "When did it start giving you trouble?" he asked. "About 2 weeks ago," Sarah said. "It would not start some mornings. Then yesterday it just died completely." Jake checked the battery and the spark plugs. He tested the starter and looked at the belts. After an hour of work, he found the problem. The alternator was bad. "The good news is that it can be fixed," Jake told Sarah. "The bad news is that you need a new alternator." "How much will that cost?" Sarah asked. "Probably around $200 for the part plus labor if you take it to a shop." Sarah's face fell. "I do not have that much money right now. Teaching does not pay very well, and I am still paying off debt from my divorce." "I can fix it myself," Jake said. "I just need to buy the part. It will save you the labor cost." "I cannot ask you to do that," Sarah said. "You are not asking," Jake said. "I am offering." They drove to an auto parts store in Jake's truck. Jake bought the alternator with his own money, even though Sarah protested. Then they went back to her apartment and Jake spent the afternoon installing it. While Jake worked, Sarah brought him water and snacks. She also told him about her students and her job. Jake liked hearing about her work. It was so different from his own life, but he could see how much she cared about teaching. "There is a little boy in my class named Miguel," Sarah said. "He just moved here from Mexico and does not speak much English yet, but he is so smart. Yesterday he drew a picture of his family and explained it to me in Spanish and broken English. It was beautiful." Jake listened while he worked. He liked the sound of Sarah's voice and the way she talked about her students. It was clear that she was a good teacher who really cared about the children. When Jake finished fixing the car, it started right away. Sarah clapped her hands and smiled. "You did it," she said. "Thank you so much, Jake. How can I pay you back?" "You do not need to pay me back," Jake said, wiping his hands on a rag. "At least let me buy you dinner," Sarah said. "There is a nice restaurant downtown." Jake looked down at his dirty clothes and work boots. "I am not dressed for a restaurant." "Then we will go somewhere casual," Sarah said. "Please. I want to thank you properly." They went to a small diner near Sarah's apartment. Jake felt more comfortable there than he would have in a fancy restaurant. They ordered hamburgers and talked while they ate. "Tell me about the ranch," Sarah said. "Your letters make it sound like a beautiful place." Jake told her about the wide pastures and the mountains in the distance. He told her about the horses he trained and the satisfaction of working outside every day. Sarah listened with interest, asking questions about things she had never experienced. "It sounds like a good life," she said. "It is," Jake said. "But it can be lonely sometimes." "I know about lonely," Sarah said quietly. After dinner, they walked around Sarah's neighborhood. She showed him the school where she taught and the library where she went on weekends. Jake saw how different her world was from his, but he also saw how she was making a life for herself in this new place. "I should probably head back tomorrow," Jake said as they walked back to her apartment. "I have to be at work on Monday." "I understand," Sarah said. "Thank you again for everything. For fixing my car, for driving all this way, for being such a good friend." Friend? Jake liked the sound of that word. He had not had many friends in his life. "If you ever need anything else, you can call me," Jake said. "The Hendersons have a phone at the ranch." "I will remember that," Sarah said. That night, Jake slept on Sarah's couch. It was too short for his long legs, but he did not mind. In the morning, Sarah made breakfast and packed him a lunch for the drive back to the ranch. As Jake drove away from Billings, he thought about the weekend. It had been good to see Sarah again and to help her with her car. But it had also been something more than that. For the first time in years, Jake had spent time in someone else's world. He had seen how Sarah lived and worked. He had met her neighbor and seen the school where she taught. Jake realized that he wanted to see Sarah again, not because she needed help, but because he enjoyed her company. That was a new feeling for him, and it made him think about his solitary life in a different way. After Jake fixed Sarah's car, their letters became more frequent. They wrote to each other every week instead of every 2 weeks. Their friendship was growing stronger, but both of them were careful not to call it anything more than friendship. Jake found himself looking forward to Sarah's letters more than anything else in his week. When he saw the mail truck coming down the ranch road, his heart would beat a little faster. Sarah's letters brought news from a different world, and Jake was hungry for that connection. Sarah wrote about her students and their progress. She told Jake about the school plays and art projects. She wrote about the changing seasons in Billings and how she was learning to appreciate the beauty of Montana. "I went hiking last weekend," she wrote in one letter. "There is a trail that goes up into the hills behind the city. From the top, you can see for miles in every direction. I thought about what you said about the big sky, and I finally understood what you meant. The world seems so much larger here than it did in Seattle." Jake wrote back about his work on the ranch. He told Sarah about the new horses that arrived each spring and how he trained them. He wrote about the cattle drives and the satisfaction of a job well done. "We moved the cattle to the summer pasture last week," he wrote. "It took 3 days of hard riding, but we got them all there safely. There is something about working with animals that feels right to me. They do not lie or pretend to be something they are not. What you see is what you get." In her next letter, Sarah mentioned that her landlord was looking for someone to do some repair work around the apartment building. "He needs someone to fix some broken steps and paint a few rooms," she wrote. "I thought about you and how good you are with your hands. I know it is a long drive, but he pays well if you are interested." Jake wrote back that he would be happy to help. The truth was, he had been hoping for an excuse to visit Billings again. Mr. Henderson gave him permission to take another weekend off, and Jake drove to the city with his tools and work clothes. This time Jake stayed for 3 days. He fixed the broken steps and painted 2 apartment units. Sarah helped him when she was not at school, bringing him lunch and helping him clean up at the end of each day. Working together felt natural to both of them. Sarah was good at the detail work, like painting around windows and door frames. Jake handled the heavy lifting and the more complicated repairs. They worked well as a team. In the evenings, Sarah showed Jake more of her world. They went to a school basketball game where some of her former students were playing. They visited the library where Sarah spent many of her Saturday afternoons. They had dinner at different restaurants around the city. Jake was amazed by how much Sarah had learned about Billings in the few months she had lived there. She knew the best places to eat and shop. She had made friends with her neighbors and other teachers. She was building a life in this new place. "You have done well here," Jake told her as they walked through downtown Billings on his last evening. "It was not easy at first," Sarah admitted. "I felt so lost and alone. But people here are kind. They have been patient with me while I learned how things work." "You are stronger than you think," Jake said. Sarah looked at him with surprise. "What makes you say that?" "You left everything you knew and started over in a completely new place. That takes courage." Sarah had never thought of herself as courageous. She had always felt like she was just trying to survive each day. But hearing Jake say it made her think about her situation differently. These monthly visits became a pattern. Jake would find reasons to come to Billings, and Sarah would find projects that needed his help. Sometimes it was legitimate work that her landlord needed done. Sometimes Sarah would invent problems that needed fixing just so she could see Jake. Jake always stayed on Sarah's couch when he visited. Her apartment was small, but they had learned to share the space comfortably. Jake would wake up early and make coffee while Sarah got ready for school. In the evenings, they would cook dinner together and talk about their days. Slowly, they were learning about each other in ways that letters could not reveal. Jake discovered that Sarah sang while she cooked, and that she talked to her plants like they were pets. Sarah learned that Jake was a careful and thoughtful person who never rushed into anything. During one visit, Sarah's neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, invited them both for Sunday dinner. Mrs. Patterson was an elderly woman who had lived in the building for 20 years. She had taken Sarah under her wing when Sarah first moved to Billings. "So, Jake," Mrs. Patterson said as they ate her pot roast and potatoes, How long have you and Sarah been dating? Jake nearly choked on his food. Sarah's face turned red. We are just friends, Sarah said quickly. Oh, Mrs. Patterson said, looking back and forth between them. My mistake. But the question hung in the air for the rest of the meal. After dinner, Jake and Sarah walked back to her apartment in uncomfortable silence. I am sorry about that, Sarah finally said. Mrs. Patterson means well, but she says whatever comes into her head. It is okay, Jake said. But it was not really okay. The question had forced both of them to think about something they had been avoiding. That night, as Jake lay on the couch, he thought about Mrs. Patterson's assumption. Was it so obvious to other people that he and Sarah cared about each other as more than friends? Jake had been trying not to think about his feelings for Sarah. She was educated and intelligent. She was a teacher who worked with her mind instead of her hands. What could she possibly see in a cowboy who had not even finished high school? In her bedroom, Sarah was having similar thoughts. She cared about Jake more than she wanted to admit. He was kind and gentle and completely different from her ex-husband. But Jake lived 3 hours away and had a life that was completely different from hers. How could they ever make a relationship work? Neither of them said anything about Mrs. Patterson's question the next morning. Jake left for the ranch as planned, and they went back to writing letters. But something had changed. They were both more aware of the feelings that were growing between them. In her next letter, Sarah wrote carefully around the subject. I have been thinking about what Mrs. Patterson said, she wrote. I want you to know that I value our friendship very much. I do not want anything to change between us. Jake wrote back just as carefully. I value our friendship too, he said. You do not have to worry about anything changing. But they both knew that something already had changed. The question was what they were going to do about it. Over the next few visits, they continued to dance around their feelings. They were more aware of each other in ways they had not been before. When their hands touched while they were working on a project, they both felt the electricity. When Sarah laughed at something Jake said, he felt his heart skip a beat. They were falling in love, but neither of them wanted to be the first to say it. They were both afraid of ruining the friendship they had built. They were both afraid that the other person did not feel the same way, so they continued their careful friendship, visiting once a month and writing letters in between. But with each visit, it became harder to pretend that they were just friends. The tension was building, and they both knew that something would have to give eventually. Almost a year had passed since Jake and Sarah first met in the wagon yard. Their monthly visits and weekly letters had become the most important parts of both their lives. But they were still calling themselves friends, even though everyone around them could see they were in love. The pretending became harder during Jake's September visit to Billings. Sarah had been teaching for a full year now, and was more confident in her job. Her apartment felt more like a home, decorated with things she had collected and artwork from her students. She seemed settled and happy, but Jake could sense something was bothering her. She was quieter than usual and seemed distracted. On his second day there, while they were painting her landlord's storage room, Jake finally asked what was wrong. The school district offered me a promotion, Sarah said, not looking at him. Jake stopped painting. That is good news, is it not? It would mean more money and better benefits, Sarah said. But I would have to move to the main office in downtown Billings. I would not be teaching children anymore. I would be working with administrators and writing reports. Do you want the job? Jake asked. Sarah sighed. I do not know. The money would be nice, and it would be a step up in my career, but I love teaching. I love working with the kids. Jake could hear the uncertainty in her voice. He set down his paintbrush and turned to face her. What does your heart tell you? He asked. My heart tells me to stay in the classroom, Sarah said. But my brain tells me I should take the promotion. It is a good opportunity. Jake nodded. He understood about making practical decisions versus following your heart. He had been making practical decisions his whole life. When do you have to decide? He asked. Next week, Sarah said. That evening, they went to dinner at their favorite diner. Sarah was still thinking about the job offer, and Jake was thinking about something else that was bothering him. I got some news too, Jake said as they ate their burgers. Sarah looked up from her food. What kind of news? Mr. Henderson offered. Me the foreman job, Jake said. Old Pete is retiring and Henderson wants me to take his place. Sarah's eyes widened. Jake, that is wonderful. You have been working toward that for years. It comes with a house on the ranch and a big raise, Jake said. It is everything I have been working for. But you do not sound happy about it, Sarah said. Jake looked out the diner window at the busy street. It would mean I could not travel as much. Foremen do not get to take long weekends whenever they want. I would have more responsibility and less freedom. Sarah understood what he was not saying. If Jake took the foreman job, he would not be able to visit her every month. Their friendship would have to change. When do you have to decide? She asked quietly. Next week, Jake said. They walked home in silence, both thinking about how their decisions would affect each other. Back at Sarah's apartment, they sat on her small couch drinking coffee and avoiding the conversation they both knew they needed to have. Finally, Sarah spoke. Jake, I need to ask you something. What is it? Mrs. Patterson was right, was she not? We are more than friends. Jake felt his heart start beating faster. They had been dancing around this question for months. What do you think? He asked. I think I am in love with you, Sarah said quietly. And I think you might feel the same way about me. Jake looked at her sitting next to him on the couch. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she was wearing one of his old work shirts that she had borrowed for painting. She looked beautiful and scared and hopeful all at the same time. I do feel the same way, Jake said. I have for months. Then why have we been pretending? Sarah asked. Because I do not know how to make it work, Jake said honestly. You are a teacher with a college education. I am a cowboy who never finished high school. You live in the city and I live on a ranch. We want different things. Do we? Sarah asked. What do you want, Jake? Jake thought about the question. What did he want? For most of his adult life, he had wanted security and independence. He had wanted a steady job and a place to call home, but now, sitting next to Sarah, he realized those things did not matter as much as he thought they did. I want to be with you, he said simply. I want to be with you too, Sarah said. But you are right. We have to figure out how to make it work. They talked until late that night about their feelings and their fears. They both agreed that they loved each other, but they also both worried about the practical problems they would face. If I take the promotion, I will have more money but less time, Sarah said. If you take the foreman job, you will have more responsibility but less freedom. Either way, it will be harder for us to see each other. Maybe we are thinking about this wrong, Jake said. Maybe instead of trying to fit our relationship into our existing lives, we should think about building a new life together. What do you mean? Sarah asked. I mean, maybe we should stop making decisions based on what we think we should do and start making decisions based on what we want to do. Sarah looked at Jake with new eyes. This quiet cowboy who had always seemed so practical was suggesting they take a leap of faith together. That is scary, she said. Yes, it is, Jake agreed. But being apart is scary too. The next morning was Jake's last day in Billings before he had to return to the ranch. They had agreed to think about everything they had discussed and make their decisions separately. But as Jake packed his truck, both of them knew they did not want to spend another month apart, wondering and worrying. Sarah, Jake said as he put his bag in the truck, will you take a drive with me? Where? She asked. I want to show you the place where we met, Jake said. They drove to the wagon yard outside of town. It looked exactly the same as it had a year ago. The old wagons were still scattered around the dirt lot. The water trough was still there. Jake parked his truck and they got out. Sarah walked to the wagon wheel where she had slept that cold October night. She could hardly believe. It had only been a year ago. It felt like a lifetime. This is where it all started, she said. This is where I first saw you, Jake said. Sleeping under the stars, looking like you belonged there even though you were completely out of place. Sarah smiled. I was so scared. That night, I had no idea what I was doing or where I was going. But you did it anyway, Jake said. You started over in a place where you knew no one. You built a new life from nothing. We both did, Sarah said. You helped a stranger without asking for anything in return. That took courage, too. They stood in the wagon yard as the sun set behind the mountains, just like it had on the night they met. The air was getting cold, just like it had that night. But this time, they were not strangers. This time, they were two people in love trying to figure out their future. I do not want to lose you, Jake said. You will not lose me, Sarah said. We will figure this out, together. As they drove back to Billings, they began to talk about real possibilities instead of problems. Maybe Jake could find work closer to the city. Maybe Sarah could teach at a school near the ranch. Maybe they could find a compromise that would work for both of them. For the first time since they had admitted their feelings, they felt hopeful instead of scared. They had spent months building a friendship based on honesty and trust. Now they were ready to build a love based on the same foundation. After their conversation in the wagon yard, Jake and Sarah spent the next 2 weeks writing letters back and forth, trying to figure out how to build a life together. They considered many different options. Sarah could move to a small town near the ranch and teach there. Jake could leave ranch work and find a job in Billings. They could take turns living in each other's places. But none of these options felt quite right. Each one required one of them to give up something important. Then Jake had an idea that surprised even him. He called Sarah from the phone at the ranch house one evening. I want to talk to Mr. Henderson, Jake said. I want to see if there is a way I can take the foreman job but live off the ranch. Is that possible? Sarah asked. I do not know, Jake said, but it is worth asking. The ranch is only 45 minutes from Billings. I could drive there every day. That is a long commute, Sarah said. It is not that far, Jake said, and it would mean we could be together. Sarah felt her heart jump with hope, but she tried to stay practical. What if he says no? Then we will think of something else, Jake said, but I have to try. The next morning, Jake knocked on Mr. Henderson's office door. Henderson was working on the ranch's books, but he looked up when Jake came in. What can I do for you, Jake? Henderson asked. I wanted to talk to you about the foreman job, Jake said. I would like to accept it, but I need to ask for something unusual. Henderson leaned back in his chair. What kind of unusual? I would like to live in Billings instead of in the foreman's house on the ranch, Jake said. I would drive out here every morning and drive back every evening. Henderson raised his eyebrows. That is unusual. May I ask why? Jake took a deep breath. I am planning to get married. My future wife has a teaching job in Billings, and I do not want to ask her to give it up. Henderson smiled. So the friend you have been visiting is more than a friend. Yes, sir, Jake said, feeling his cheeks get warm. Henderson thought for a moment. The foreman's house comes with the job because we expect the foreman to be available for emergencies. If you live in Billings, what happens when we have a problem at night or on weekends? I can be here in 45 minutes, Jake said. And I will give you my phone number in Billings. You can call me anytime. What about during bad weather? Henderson asked. Montana winters can make that drive impossible sometimes. I will keep a sleeping bag in the bunkhouse for those times, Jake said. If there is a blizzard or ice storm, I will stay on the ranch until it passes. Henderson studied Jake's face. In the 3 years Jake had worked for him, Henderson had never seen him ask for anything. Jake was reliable and hard-working. He knew cattle and horses better than men twice his age. Henderson did not want to lose him. This woman must be pretty special, Henderson said. She is, Jake said simply. All right, Henderson said. We will try it. But if it does not work out, if your living situation interferes with your job, we will have to make changes. I understand, Jake said. Thank you, Mr. Henderson. When is the wedding? Henderson asked. Jake realized he had not actually asked Sarah to marry him yet. Soon, he said. That evening, Jake called Sarah with the good news. She was so excited she started crying over the phone. I cannot believe he said yes, she said. Are you sure you want to make that drive every day? I am sure, Jake said. Now I just need to ask you something properly. What do you mean? Sarah asked. I told Henderson I was getting married, but I never actually asked you, Jake said. Will you marry me, Sarah? There was silence on the phone for a moment. Then Sarah started laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you. Good, Jake said, because I already told my boss we were getting married. Sarah decided not to take the promotion at the school district. She wanted to stay in the classroom with her students. Jake accepted the foreman position and started looking for a house to rent in Billings. Finding a house was harder than they expected. Jake's new salary was good, but houses in Billings were expensive. They finally found a small 2-bedroom house on the edge of the city. It was not fancy, but it had a big yard and was only 40 minutes from the ranch. They planned a simple wedding for the following spring. Sarah's parents flew out from Seattle, surprised but happy to meet the cowboy who had captured their daughter's heart. Jake had no family to invite, but Mr. and Mrs. Henderson came along with several of the other ranch hands. The ceremony was held at the courthouse in Billings. Sarah wore a simple blue dress and carried wildflowers that Jake had picked that morning. Jake wore his best jeans and a white shirt, with his cowboy hat in his hands. After the ceremony, they had dinner at Sarah's favorite restaurant, Sarah's. Parents were charmed by Jake's quiet politeness and his obvious love for their daughter. Mrs. Henderson cried during the toasts. Even the tough ranch hands seemed moved by the simple ceremony. For their honeymoon, Jake and Sarah drove to Seattle so Jake could meet the rest of Sarah's family. It was Jake's first time in a big city, and he was overwhelmed by the traffic and noise. But Sarah's family welcomed him warmly, and he began to understand where Sarah had come from. It is so different from Montana, Jake said, as they walked through downtown Seattle. Do you like it? Sarah asked. It is interesting, Jake said diplomatically, but I am glad we are going home to Montana. Sarah smiled. Home. She liked the sound of that. When they returned to Billings, they began the process of building a life together. Jake kept his promise to Mr. Henderson, driving to the ranch every morning before sunrise and returning home every evening after dark. The long days were tiring, but he loved coming home to Sarah. Sarah continued teaching her 3rd grade class. She told her students about her new husband who worked with horses and cattle. Some of the children had never met a real cowboy, and they were fascinated by Jake's work. Their house became a gathering place for their friends. Sarah's fellow teachers would come for dinner and stay to hear Jake's stories about ranch life. The other ranch hands would stop by when they came to town, curious about Jake's city wife who had convinced him to live off the ranch. Jake and Sarah learned to blend their two very different worlds. Sarah learned to appreciate the satisfaction of physical work, helping Jake with projects around their house. Jake learned to enjoy cultural events, attending school plays and teacher conferences with Sarah. They discovered that their differences made their relationship stronger rather than weaker. Sarah's education and social skills complemented Jake's practical knowledge and steady nature. Jake's calm presence balanced Sarah's sometimes anxious energy. Not everything was easy. Jake's commute was long and tiring, especially in winter. Sarah sometimes felt isolated in their suburban neighborhood. After living in her apartment building where she knew all her neighbors, they had to learn to manage money together and make decisions as a couple instead of as individuals. But they worked through each challenge together, remembering the friendship that had brought them to this point. They talked through their problems, instead of letting them fester. They supported each other's dreams and made compromises when necessary. One evening, as they sat on their back porch watching the sunset, Sarah looked at Jake and marveled at how much their lives had changed. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Giving up the foreman's house to live here with me?" Jake thought about the question seriously before answering. "I never think about what I gave up," he said. "I only think about what I gained." "What did you gain?" Sarah asked, even though she thought she knew the answer. "Everything," Jake said simply. "I gained everything I never knew I wanted." 5 years after their wedding, Jake and Sarah's life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Their small house on the edge of Billings had become a warm and welcoming home. The yard that had once been empty now had a garden where Sarah grew vegetables and flowers. Jake had built a workshop in the garage where he fixed things for neighbors and friends. Their house had become a gathering place for an unlikely group of friends. On any given weekend, you might find Sarah's fellow teachers sitting around the kitchen table grading papers while Jake and his ranch buddies worked on someone's broken truck in the driveway. The two groups had learned to appreciate each other, sharing stories and meals. Mrs. Patterson, Sarah's elderly neighbor from her apartment building, came for dinner every Sunday. She had become like a grandmother to both of them, offering advice and telling stories about the old days in Montana. Jake always made sure to pick her up and drive her home, treating her with the same gentle respect he showed all elderly people. Jake's daily commute to the Hendricks Ranch had become as natural as breathing. He left the house every morning at 5:30, arriving at the ranch before sunrise. In the evenings, he drove home tired but satisfied with his work. The long drives gave him time to think and plan, and he had come to enjoy the quiet time alone. Sarah was thriving as a teacher. She had been promoted to team leader for the third grade classes, which gave her more responsibility but allowed her to stay in the classroom. Her students loved her, and she had a reputation as one of the best teachers in the school. Many parents specifically requested that their children be placed in her class. The biggest change in their lives came on a snowy February morning when Sarah woke up feeling sick. At first, she thought she had caught the flu that was going around the school. But when the nausea continued for a week, she went to see the doctor. Sarah drove straight from the doctor's office to the ranch to find Jake. She found him in the barn, training a young horse. When he saw her face, he immediately stopped what he was doing. "What is wrong?" he asked, walking over to her. Sarah smiled, but Jake could see tears in her eyes. "Nothing is wrong," she said. "Everything is right. Jake, I am pregnant." Jake stared at her for a moment, not sure he had heard correctly. "Pregnant? We are going to have a baby," Sarah said. Jake's face broke into the biggest smile Sarah had ever seen. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. The young horse watched them with curious eyes, probably wondering why the humans were acting so strange. "When?" Jake asked, setting Sarah down gently. "The doctor thinks sometime in October," Sarah said. October. Almost exactly 6 years after they had met in the wagon yard. It seemed like perfect timing to both of them. The pregnancy was not easy for Sarah. She was sick for the first 3 months, and tired for most of the rest. Jake took over all the housework and cooking, learning to make simple meals that would not upset Sarah's stomach. He drove her to all her doctor appointments and read books about pregnancy and babies. Sarah's parents flew out from Seattle when the baby was due. Jake's nervousness about becoming a father was obvious to everyone. He had never been around babies much and worried that he would not know what to do. "You will figure it out," Mr. Henderson told him one day at the ranch. "Good fathers are not born knowing everything. They learn as they go." The baby arrived 2 weeks early on a crisp October morning. Jake had just finished the morning chores at the ranch when Sarah called to say she was having contractions. He drove to Billings faster than he had ever driven before, arriving at the hospital with hay still in his hair. Their daughter was born 6 hours later. She was small and perfect, with dark hair like her mother and long fingers like her father. When the nurse placed the baby in Jake's arms, he felt something he had never experienced before. It was love, but deeper and more protective than any feeling he had ever known. "What should we name her?" Sarah asked from her hospital bed. Jake looked down at his daughter's tiny face. "Hope," he said without hesitation. "Her name is Hope." Sarah smiled. It was the perfect name for their daughter, born from a love that had started with a simple act of kindness and grown into something neither of them had expected to find. Hope Martinez was a happy baby who rarely cried. She seemed to enjoy being passed around among the many adults who visited their house. Mrs. Patterson declared herself the baby's honorary grandmother and came over even more often to help with childcare. Jake was a natural father, despite his earlier worries. He was patient and gentle with Hope, singing her to sleep with old cowboy songs his grandmother had taught him. He built her a beautiful wooden crib and later a rocking horse. He talked to her constantly, telling her about the horses and cattle at the ranch. Sarah took maternity leave from teaching and found that she loved being home with her daughter. But she also missed the classroom and her students. When Hope was 6 months old, Sarah went back to work part-time, and Mrs. Patterson watched the baby in the afternoons. Their life was busy but happy. Jake still made his daily commute to the ranch, but now he hurried home even more eagerly each evening. Sarah balanced teaching with motherhood, often grading papers while Hope napped in her lap. On Hope's first birthday, they had a party in their backyard. All their friends came, from teachers to ranch hands to neighbors. Mrs. Patterson made a cake and Jake grilled hamburgers for everyone. Hope sat in her high chair, more interested in playing with the wrapping paper than opening her presents. That evening, after everyone had gone home and Hope was asleep, Jake and Sarah sat on their back porch with cups of coffee. It was October again, and the air had the same crisp feeling as the night they had met in the wagon yard. "Can you believe it has been 7 years?" Sarah asked. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday," Jake said. "Sometimes it feels like we have always been together." Sarah leaned against Jake's shoulder. "Do you remember what you wrote in one of your first letters? You said your life was simple, but it suited you." "I remember," Jake said. "Do you miss that simple life?" Sarah asked. Jake looked through the window at their house, where his daughter was sleeping peacefully in her crib. He thought about his wife, beside him, who had changed his whole world by sleeping in a wagon yard on a cold night. He thought about the friends who gathered around their table and the work that gave his days meaning. "This life is not simple," Jake said. "But it is so, much better than simple. This life is full." Sarah smiled and took Jake's hand. "I love our full life," she said. As they sat together in the quiet evening, both of them thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had started with a stranger's kindness and grown into something neither of them could have imagined. They had built a life together that honored both of their dreams while creating new ones they had never thought to want. Jake thought about that young cowboy who had covered a sleeping woman with his blanket 7 years ago. That man had been content with his solitary life, never knowing that he was capable of the love and joy he felt now. Sarah thought about the scared and lonely woman who had started over in a new place with nothing but determination and $43. She had been running from her old life, never knowing she was running toward her real life. Their daughter stirred in her sleep, and they both went inside to check on her. Hope was sleeping peacefully, one tiny fist curled around the ear of the stuffed horse Jake had given her. She was the perfect symbol of their life together, a beautiful combination of everything they had brought to their love and everything they had built from it. As Jake tucked the blanket around his daughter, he remembered his grandmother's wool blanket that had started it all. That blanket was now stored carefully in their bedroom closet, waiting for the day when Hope would be old enough to hear the story of how her parents met and how a simple act of kindness had changed everything.